Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Care Visions Healthy Aging live conversation. Regulars will know that I host this every Tuesday afternoon on behalf of Care Visions to bring people up to date on what they can be doing to live healthily as possible, despite the difficulties imposed by coronavirus. There are always things we can do to live and learn to improve the way we live, both as elderly and particularly for people with dementia as well. So I'll introduce my guest in a few minutes, who's Professor Alistair Burns, the National Clinical Director for Dementia for the mental health of older people at NHS England. So I'll come to Alistair in a moment when we're ready to go. But let me just bring you up to date with a few things that Care Visions have been producing in the last week. It's ever going forward in terms of the online resources it has available. Regulars will know that there's been a music memories video produced pretty much every week for the last few weeks. There was one on the swinging 60s with the Beatles. Then last week I talked about one with Ike and Tina Turner. Well, this week is probably the most controversial yet because it's called Elvis Presley, the Undisputed King. Well, looking at the chatter that's been on Facebook and YouTube since, the Undisputed King is certainly a matter of opinion. Some people seem to agree and some people don't. So do have a look at those videos because they're a great way of feeling good and reminiscing about times you remember, music you remember. And music, as we know, is an important part of living well and enjoying the world we're in. The other thing Care Visions has been doing is a number of programs to help you understand how to look after yourself from a video. And there's one by Dr. Reinhard Guss, a psychologist, old age psychologist. He did a program a couple of weeks ago on mental health for older people. And what's happened this week is part 2 of the programs from Dr. Reinhard Guss. So have a look for that. And then finally, there's a continuing program of live classes that Care Visions hosts where people can join in and participate in live classes. And this will be an expanding program over the coming weeks. There's a live class this week. I think it's the 3rd or 4th week it's been running for physical activity. It's designed for anyone, so you don't have to be a super gym goer to join in. Please do join in. The class is hosted by a gym instructor, Duncan Vincent, and he has a program at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, which is on the YouTube site of Care Visions, and the details are on Facebook as well. So that's Friday morning at 10 o'clock. And lots of people have already enjoyed and benefited from his classes, judging by the feedback. And of course, physical exercise is good for mental as well as physical stimulation. And that may be something I'll pick up with Alistair Burns in a few minutes' time. The other class that's beginning soon, with the first class on Friday, the 30th of October at 11 o'clock, is the Care Visions Book Club. And the reason for telling you about it now is that to join the book club, you need to get hold of the book. So you need to go out to Amazon, get the book, or to your local bookshop, get the book and start reading it to join the book club. And this is a quite unique book club. It's being run and hosted by Lucinda Hawksley, who's let me get this right, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Charles Dickens and a writer herself. So Lucinda will be hosting the book club, and her first book that people will be reading and discussing in the book club is called The Illyrian Spring by a writer called Anne Bridge. It was published in 1935 and was very controversial at the time because it's about a woman who travels through exotic locations in Europe, leaving her philandering husband behind and carving her own place in the world. So for the 1930s, it was quite a radical departure from what people expected, but it's a really good read, and Lucinda will be there to host you in a reading of that over the coming weeks. So the book club first session is on Friday, October the 30th at 11 o'clock, but up till then, you can get a copy of The Illyrian Spring by Anne Bridge, have a read, and join in that book club. And I'm sure Lucinda will be talking a little bit about her heritage from Charles Dickens as well. So it's now just after 4 o'clock, so I'm delighted to welcome Professor Alistair Burns, who has an incredibly busy schedule. So Alistair, thank you for taking some time out today. You're one of the best qualified people to talk about healthy aging, I think, that we've had on this weekly programme. What I've done with other people, and I'd love to do with you as well, is just to start on a positive note, because we all feel a bit under the cosh sometimes with coronavirus and all that that means. Please do share with us some happy moment that's happened for you in the last week that's brought a smile to your face and made you feel positive about things.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm sure that we'll return to this, but all the things that you're describing that people can do and the things that you are are describing there are really important just to keep active. I guess, as you say, these are different times, but it does give the opportunity sometimes to do things in a different way. And one thing that my wife and I have done is that we had a tandem, which I have to say was kept in the garage for some time, and I think was probably best described as a low mileage tandem. Thanks to lockdown, with the issues of needing to take exercise, perhaps those the places that you often go to, perhaps not being as easily accessible, is that we've now gone out on the tandem a number of times, and we've clocked up a fair few miles. So it's actually looking like a second-hand tandem now, as opposed to one that was brand new. So doing those things differently, I think, is one of the things that has been interesting for me, and certainly going out in the sun. I'm from Manchester, as you know, and the sun always shines in Manchester. And so enjoying all the sun in Manchester out on a tandem in the fresh air and getting exercise. And there's no doubt people wave at you and you feel connected. So if there was one memory, and one memory that I'll take back, not just the last week, it's something to do with that, Jeremy.
That's a lovely story, Alistair. And let me just check one thing, because I've been out on my bike a few more times than I have recently. As you say, I dusted it down and oiled it and been out, not a tandem, just an ordinary bike. But the other day I was out and somebody on a tandem went past me going up a hill. And then I realized that it was an electrically supported tandem with a little motor. So let me just check whether you have a little motor on your tandem or whether it's pure leg power.
So, as you know, motors on bikes are the work of the devil, and we know that one must pedal as much as you can, and so our tandem is there. As you know, there's two parts to a tandem. The person at the front is the captain, and the person behind is the stoker. And it would obviously be inappropriate for me to reveal which of the two positions I have, but certainly a number of people have shouted and commented that perhaps the person behind isn't doing quite so much work. So definitely not an electric tandem.
Okay, and anyone who's watching who's in the Manchester area will now be on the lookout for you on your tandem, I'm sure, Alistair, and probably post photos of you hard at it on the Facebook site. The other question I was going to ask you, just so people get to know you a little bit, is, and you've sort of led me into it, is what do you personally do to make sure you're staying sort of healthy body and healthy mind? What's your personal recipe for keeping young and active in your mind and body?
I think the one thing is to, I was not, I always say that I came late to exercise, and that, it was only when I reached a certain age that, if you like, the benefits of walking, perhaps even going to the gym, but walking and being active, getting a dog as well. And I know, Jeremy, you and I have spoken before about the hugely positive effects of a dog, and I just hope my dog doesn't rush in 15 minutes and break things up. I think it's remaining curious and it's remaining interested, and whether that's part of, and I'm sure we'll come to this, staying positive and staying interested, but it's staying interested in things and curious and trying new things as well. And you and I have discussed over the years, Jeremy, about things that we can do to prevent the onset of dementia, and learning new things. And one of the things that I think the lockdown and the current situation has given us is time, and we now do have time to do these things that I think for many years we said, oh, I'm too busy, I don't have the time to do them, but now we can do. So doing something different and new, but staying curious and interested, I think is probably something that I would say.
That's really useful advice. And before I go any further, please do, anyone who's viewing who wants to ask a question, use the chat function on Facebook to put your question, and we'll come to some questions to Alistair at the end. But picking up on what you just said, I think something Angela Rippon pointed out in the television program she did, that doing something new is always an opportunity, and it doesn't actually matter whether you get any good at it. It's just the exercise of doing something else. So, and I think the example she gave was learning a language or playing a musical instrument. It's nothing to do with level of achievement. It's just the having a go, and probably that's good advice, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and it's the practice and the. I know people used to say it's better to travel than to arrive. And so it's that traveling, it's that doing things, it's stretching your, whether it's stretching your muscles, or if it's stretching your mind, it's doing something that is a, a bit different. The end result, obviously, it can be satisfying to say to have learned a new language and use it in a conversation abroad, or to learn to play an instrument. A few years ago, I started to play the saxophone, and so there are things that we can do. But you're absolutely right. It's the reason for doing it and wanting to do it, rather than the end result, which is equally as important.
And do you think people should be doing things on their own, or are there still ways people can connect with other people, even with the lockdown that is happening around the country and the isolation and shielding many people are following? Are there ways of doing things with other people despite the limitations posed by coronavirus?
Well, as you know, Jeremy, and something that we've discussed over the years is the issue of connectedness. And we know that dementia is a condition that disconnects you from your family, disconnects you from your community, and can sometimes disconnect you from yourself. And so retaining these connections is really important. Obviously, the guidelines are there and should be followed in terms of the number of people we can see, but using things like this. I know that many meetings now I do over a video link. In our clinical practice, we're using more and more remote consultations, and so it is very easy to keep in touch. And I know from my personal experience with relatives that using something like this is really important. So that staying in touch is really key.
And can people still get the support they need from the NHS despite coronavirus? Because a lot of people are worried. There's stuff on the news about people not being diagnosed with things early enough, not getting the support. When it comes to dementia and mental well-being of older people, should people still be able to get what they need, even if it's in a slightly different way from what they're used to?
Yes, absolutely. And services are still there, and services are open, and services are available clearly in our own area of memory clinics. The consultations, as you say, can be done in a different way. Many services are starting face-to-face interviews again, but the services are open, the services are there, and people, as they did before, should go, if they're worried about their memory, go to their GP and have an assessment, and the facilities are there.
And some people have said in the past, and you and I have heard this many times over the years, even from some GPs. I remember we were in a meeting many years ago, and quite a senior GP said, "Oh, there's no point diagnosing somebody because nothing can be done." But that's not true, is it? I mean, there are things that you can do. If you get a diagnosis of dementia, it's not the end of life by any means, and there are things that people can do to live as well as possible.
There is so much that we can do, and it's quite right. But as you say, it's fair to reflect that a generation ago, that feeling was there. That you know, there was nothing that could be done. There were no treatments. But as you say, there are lots that we can do. And if I'm talking to people at the clinic, I tend to divide it into two. There's the things that we can do to support people. So I think the first stage is recognizing that many people who may be concerned about a memory problem actually do not have dementia. They can have simple, treatable physical or emotional illnesses, and that weight and that worry can be lifted. I think because of the increased interest in dementia, the profile of dementia, it's in the papers every day, is that people are aware of it. So anyone who has a memory problem may worry that they have dementia. So that reassurance by identifying things are important. If a diagnosis is made, that support that's available through a number of areas, for example, the Alzheimer's Society, Dementia Connect, all the memory clinics that there are, dementia support advisors, Admiral nurses, all the various things like Tide, and these things are available to provide support. So there is lots of support out there. There are practical things. that can be done as well as drugs.
Well, yes, and I was going to come on to that because people often assume that the only treatment for any disease is drugs, but actually there's not that much in the terms of drug intervention that can help people with Alzheimer's or dementia. What is the state of play on people's hopes for drugs and what difference they can make?
There are drugs that we prescribe at the moment. There are 4 drugs. 3 are from one type, and the other is from a different class. We've had these drugs now around for 20 years, and they are safe drugs. They can be given. It's in the form of a simple tablet, and they are effective. Many people I see whose symptoms improve on them, and there's some evidence that they can slow the progression. And certainly, anecdotally, people that I see over the years, people think that the medication has helped in a very significant way. So there are medications that we can give for Alzheimer's disease, but also if we look at vascular dementia, there are things that we can do to slow down the progression of that. And if we're talking about vascular risk, one of the key things, as you know, Jeremy, that we've been able to talk about in the last few years is prevention of dementia and the things that people can do to reduce their individual risk of dementia. I know on one of your previous calls you had Professor Banerjee talking about prevention, and there are many things that individuals can do to reduce their own individual risk.
And I think that's an important point. You said it earlier about the non-drug support. In many ways, I suspect that's more important than the drugs, both in terms of prevention and in terms of living well. What we don't seem to know, we don't seem to research non-drug interventions nearly as much as drugs. Why is that? Are we not interested in it, or why is there not more research into non-drug interventions and how people can live well?
It's an interesting point, and I think it's fair to reflect that if we look back, and you or I were involved in discussions going back 5 years, and the Prime Minister's challenge on dementia, and one of the aspirations was to increase the amount of funding that went into dementia research. And over the last few years, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of research, that amount of money that goes into dementia research. And that's partly, as you say, looking for new drug treatments, but increasingly a lot of activity looking at care. The Dementia Research Institute, for example, that was funded recently, now has a section looking specifically at care, and there are colleagues from the National Institute for Health Research who are involved in research. And Join Dementia Research is a very important initiative. And if people listening were interested in hearing more about research, then going to the Join Dementia Research website, you could sign up if you're interested in particular studies, and there's lots of information there. So you're absolutely right that, that there is a lot of research into drugs, but more recently, I've seen a lot more interest in those other sides.
And probably it's fair to say that what's good for people with dementia is good for generally older people anyway, in terms of prevention and living well. So with your wider hat on as the director responsible for old age mental health, what are are there any sort of key tips you would say for people about living as well as possible as they age, and how do we keep mentally and physically alert in terms of sort of non-drug activities that everyone can participate in? What would be your top tips?
Well, certainly in terms of the phrase that springs to mind is what's good for your heart's good for your head, and that is looking at the what we mentioned before about the vascular risk factors. So making sure that that your blood pressure is checked by your GP, that your cholesterol is a normal level, that you don't have diabetes, and that you're not overweight, and habits such as smoking and drinking in moderation are clearly important. So there are some lifestyle things that we can do that are key. In terms of remaining, if you like, positive, I think it goes back to that issue that we talked about, being curious and trying new things. Mm-hmm. And I think that very positive attitude and the positive effect of aging. And I know that you had Caroline Abrahams from Age UK in our previous call, and I'm sure Caroline would have talked about the issue of the positive effects of aging. If older people do feel sometimes anxious and depressed, I think there is a tendency for people almost to assume that's a natural part of aging. And we often hear people say, well, it's understandable, you get depressed as you get old, don't you? Well, in fact, you don't. And there are many positive things. And if you look at the proportion of the population who have symptoms of depression, there's no doubt that recent studies have shown that as we get older, you become more positive, and rates of depression actually decline. And even if you have depression, a lot of people say it can't be treated. The treatments for depression, the talking therapies, such as improving access to psychological therapies, are as effective, and there's some evidence they're more effective in older people. So there's so much that can be done.
And that refers back to something I know Care Visions have produced a couple of videos with Dr. Reinhard Gus talking about mental health in older people, which is precisely the message he's putting across, is that there's an awful lot you can do on your own, but also an awful lot of support you can get for very simple interventions that enable you to manage your well-being and feel good about getting older, and the opportunities that you have with more time and more opportunity than you probably thought you might have. Can I just deal with a couple of issues that always come up? So one is drinking in moderation. What does that mean? Because people never know. Everyone interprets it differently. How would you get people to feel positive? Because some people say drinking a little bit is actually good for you. So how do people get the right balance between drinking and not drinking?
Well, we know are the guidelines in terms of the number of units, 21 for men, 14 for women, in terms of the amount that we can drink. And in a sense, it's not too much, but as you say, there is some evidence that drinking a little can help. I would never suggest that people do drink, but certainly in terms of moderation, following the guidelines that the government have set is a very good start. Avoiding extremes.
So nothing in extreme, but the odd glass of wine won't do you a great deal of harm and might do you a little bit of good.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And in fact, my grandfather used to say, moderation in all things. And I think that's a good message.
And what about the other one that often comes up is the one about physical exercise. And a lot of people who, and you said it yourself, haven't done exercise as something they've done throughout their life particularly, then get worried about the fact that they have to become a sort of superhero and go to the gym twice a week or 3 times a week, and they get frightened. I mean, what is it? What is good exercise? How do people measure that they're getting a good amount of exercise?
I think it's very individual, Jeremy, and it's the amount that is right for you and within the abilities that you have. As we all know, as we get older, joints get a bit tired, and so it would be silly to do the amount of exercise that put pressure on your joints or perhaps gave you pain. So it's extremely individual. You mentioned the gym. We know that there is no particular need to join it in to take exercise. So walking is a great exercise. We've spoken before about getting a dog, and certainly since we've had our dog, I walk a great deal more. Of course, the benefits are not only walking, but you meet people. And as we've discussed before, there's nothing like stopping and having a chat with someone else with a dog. So that physical activity, walking, is very good. But there are other things. So, for example, instead of taking a lift, go up the stairs if it's if you can. If you're going for a bus, why not walk to the next bus stop, or get off a bus stop earlier, and just have that extra bit of walking. So we don't need to go to extremes. And going back to moderation in all things, I think the amount of exercise, and the great thing about exercise, it does make you feel better. So this is not something that someone's telling you to do that you don't want to do. You feel so much better, you sleep better, and it has very positive effects on mood.
So it sounds like a good message is set your own target, don't be over ambitious, and feel good about what you've achieved, and maybe just keep thinking about what more you can do, building on what you've done, but do it within your own boundaries and your own terms of reference.
I think that's a very good way of putting it, Jeremy.
What about the more general issue of just mental health and well-being during coronavirus? I mean, a lot of people are feeling quite isolated. One of the things that Care Visions, who, as you know, sponsor this program every week, they're doing more live classes. So they've done a lot of video material, particularly for people with dementia, but they're now doing a lot of live classes so that people can join in online in a physical exercise class. So I was just talking earlier about a book club, anyone who came on early, about a book club they set up. Are those kind of things important elements that people should build into their daily life as a way of keeping connected and stimulated?
Yes, and as I said, the description that you gave of all the things that are available, there's a fantastic array, whether it's doing a bit of exercise on a video, whether it's joining a book club. And I guess the general theme is to stay active, physically and mentally active, to stay positive, and to be curious about things. And as you say, almost have a sense of purpose, and to have something, a bit of a structure during the day is important as well. Perhaps having some things that you should do every day. I know that people at work do to-do lists. I do them all the time. So perhaps having some things that you think in that day that you would like to achieve is really important. It gives a sense of purpose. You can stay connected to people while at the same time staying safe. So that activity and being positive is really good. Another thing we discovered during the lockdown was doing jigsaws. And again, that's great in a number of ways. It's concentration, so you improve attention. It's kind of fine motor skills. It's problem solving. I would never suggest everyone does a jigsaw, but anything that's individual that you enjoy doing. And I think the message that these are good things that we should enjoy. And as we've said for dementia, what's good for your heart's good for your head. It will have positive benefits in all these areas.
And for everyone, is it the case then that sort of, if you think about three areas of if you like, cognitive, emotional and physical stimulation, you need to be thinking about all three, but lots of activities like going for a walk with the dog can stimulate not just physical, but also your emotional and brain functioning as well. They're three overlapping circles of activity, if you like, but you need to think about all three. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And as a Scotsman, you can imagine that I like good value. So you do one, you get all three. It's a very good deal.
But do one, get two free.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions that have come in because we're shortly going to run out of time. It's amazing how quickly half an hour disappears. So Alistair, thank you for all the good advice and you're giving people. The couple of questions come in. The first one is from someone called Jean, who says, I've heard a Mediterranean diet is best to support healthy living. Is that right? Should we all be shifting to a Mediterranean diet? So it'd be great to get your reflection on diet and any tips there.
There's no doubt there's some evidence that a diet that is low in fat and high in fiber and is good for you. Again, it's kind of moderation in all things. You know, a little bit of what you fancy does you good. And so one would not suggest that everyone goes on a complete Mediterranean diet, but if you can do some things and maybe adapt the diet and replace some things with some of the Mediterranean aspects, it would do a lot of good. And if you can replace 10%, 20%, 30% with something like that, that will do you good. So good evidence that a Mediterranean diet is good for us. And again, that's not just good for your brain, it's good for your heart and good for a number of things.
And presumably there are lots of places where you can get advice on what a Mediterranean diet consists of and cookery classes and so on, even online, that people can join in that help point them in the right direction.
Yes. You can go to the Mediterranean as well and see what they're probably not quite as easy now, but
no.
In time that would be good.
Try it out. Yeah, that's good advice.
Seriously, lots of information and lots of information on a good diet. So a Mediterranean diet, a very good idea.
Okay, the second question actually sticks on the theme of diet, funnily enough. So this is from someone called Anne, who says, another question that I suspect lots of people think about, how much should I supplement my diet with vitamin pills? Because you see a lot of marketing, a lot of these companies who go on television and post adverts in the newspapers and magazines selling you vitamin pills. Is it all hogwash? Should people be filling themselves with vitamin pills, or how do you get the right balance?
Yeah, it's a challenge to get a right balance. I mean, I think if people have a healthy lifestyle, have a good diet, and do these things, probably for the majority of people, there would be no particular need to routinely supplement diet. There are specific conditions and there are specific things where vitamin D, for example, are important. But I think keeping a good, healthy diet. But if in any doubt, your GP would have lots of information about exactly what you should do. There are some vitamins that can be tested for example, and there are some specific symptoms that people can have that may reflect a deficiency that needs a supplement. So your GP and the practice nurses are in the best position to advise exactly what kind of things should be done.
So that's actually a good point, that you shouldn't be afraid, even in the current time of coronavirus, of phoning up the GP and getting their advice. And indeed, many of them are now doing virtual appointments where they'll talk to you on the phone, and it's sometimes easier to get to the GP on the telephone than going and queuing up in the surgery and waiting to be seen. So I think that sounds like good advice. When in doubt, don't hesitate to get in touch with the GP as your way into understanding a bit more about your own body and how things can be supported well going forward. I've got time,
Jeremy,
I think.
And Jeremy, if I could just emphasise that again, as we said at the beginning, just to reassure people, the NHS is open, GP surgeries are there to support, and you know, there are challenging times, but the NHS is doing a fantastic job at supporting people, and so people should, if as the National Clinical Director for NHS England said last night, if you're worried, if you have a lump, if you have chest pain, anything like that, you should go and see your doctor in the usual way, because the NHS is open to be there and to support you.
Alistair, that's a very good message to end on. I think we're right out of time. I've got a couple more questions which I won't get to, I'm afraid, so apologies to those people, but we promise to finish on time for anyone who needs to get away. Alistair Burns, thank you so much for what's been a really helpful conversation. I think lots of people tuning in will have got some useful tips and advice, particularly around not having to depend on drug treatment for everything. There are lots you can do for yourself, and lots of support available and advice available, even with coronavirus, making a different way of getting support, but not meaning it's not available. It's still there. So Professor Alistair Burns, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Next week, I'm pleased to say that we've got Sir David Behan, who was the man who headed up the Care Quality Commission. He's now the chairman of Health Education England, and also the chairman of HC1, one of the home care care home providers rather. So David Behan will be with us next week, and I'm sure we'll be looking at how do care homes operate well in the coming winter months, and how can we all be supportive of people in care homes as well as more widely. So thank you everybody for joining me this afternoon. Thank you again to Alistair, and hope everyone has a good week. Thanks very much.
Right.